Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Faith Under Fire podcast from ACN Ireland. My name is Brandon Scott, and I work in promotions, communications, and advocacy for ACN Ireland.
And I'm Michael Kelly. I'm the Director of Public Affairs.
Today, we're delighted to be joined by a very special guest, all the way from Germany via Tyrone. She is the Executive President of ACN International, and she's a respected employee of ACN for at least 40 plus years or so. Yeah. And I'm very delighted to welcome Regina Lynch.
Okay, well, I'm delighted to be here and to be talking to you, gentlemen.
And you have to be on your best behaviour today, Brandon, because, you know, you're used to having one Tyrone person trying to keep you in check. Now there's two.
I feel like there's a subtle infiltration going on, but sure, I'll just have to keep an eye on you both, It's subversives. So we're just going to start from the start, I suppose, and understand your own faith journey and your upbringing, and I suppose Catholicism and how that relates to your upbringing. So, tell us about your upbringing and Catholicism in Tyrone. Were the two very much married together?
Oh, yes. I grew up in a small village by the name of Donoughmore. And in fact, we lived between the priest's house and the chapel. And the convent school where I went was just across the road. So it was just part and parcel of my life, to speak of my life and my two sisters and all the rest. And I would say we were probably, for that time, a very typical Irish Catholic family. It was just part of our DNA. We went to church regularly. We didn't think too much about it. It was just something you did. And I remember on Sunday afternoons, my sisters and I were sometimes volunteered by our parents to count the collection from Sunday. And we were never really enthusiastic about that, but it was part and parcel of it. And looking back now, I'm really grateful for that upbringing that I had. It was very, very good.
And I mean, I know that part of the county, obviously, and it's a fairly self-consciously Catholic area. Did you have any sense growing up during the Troubles of being part of the minority community, of perhaps, being a community where the authorities in Stormont at the time didn't perhaps have your best interests at heart?
I would say not so aware of it, because I think, first of all, Donoughmore was pretty 50-50, there were no major fights that I'm aware of. But having said that, I think there were two maybe significant things. One of the disappeared is from Donoughmore, Columba McVeigh, which is very sad and which I find tragic today, that Columba's body has never been found. I think a turning point, there were two things. Bloody Sunday, I think, was a wake-up call that, this is really, really bad. This is really serious. What's happening here? And the other thing was, when I was 17, there was a girl from our class in school, Patricia Mary Devlin. Her parents were very much involved in the early days of the SDLP. They had a pub in Killisland. And one evening, going home from the pub, and Patricia Mary was with the parents, their car was attacked by masked gunmen, and the parents were killed. And Patricia Mary was badly injured, but she pretended to be dead, I think, to survive. And I think that also came home to me, this is far closer than we thought.
Yes.
Really, I just remember, you'd hear a car slowing down outside in the middle of the night, and you think to yourself, or something which came to me later through my work with ACN was, if somebody put a gun to my head and say, well, what's your religion? What would I say? What would I say? As I said later in ACN, I've met people who were put in that situation.
And presumably you became a teenager and you had career ambitions, and you finished your studies. What did you study in university?
Yeah, I studied German and French up at Coleraine, which was very small in those days. And to be very honest, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with myself. We didn't have an awful lot of career guidance in those days. And so I had studied these languages, and German and French literature. And the one thing I knew was I didn't want to be a teacher. I mean, that I was clear in my head. Well, I didn't have a vocation for that. And I thought, well, probably my German was my major, but I didn't think it was it could be better. It could have been better standard. And I thought, well, if I'm going to look for a job, maybe with a German company in Northern Ireland, I should really improve my German, and started thinking about looking for a job in Germany. And that's how ACN came on the horizon. An acquaintance of ours, and a woman in England whose family were originally from Donegal, and we would meet them always at Easter in the summer and all the rest. Margaret said to me, she heard my plans to think about going to Germany, and she says, "Oh, you should write to the headquarters of AIDS, the Church in Need in Germany. They're always looking for people who speak English, native English speakers." And to be honest, I didn't know what this was, this ACN. She told me a bit about it. I thought, okay, but I can't say I went to work for ACN with a missionary spirit or an idea that this is where I belong. It was more like, oh, I'll spend a year in Germany, improve my German, and that's it. Come back to Northern Ireland. And it's true, they were desperately looking for native English speakers. I got a job as a secretary for the Department for Africa and Asia, as it was in those days, and sat in an office with 2 Americans, a Flemish-speaking Belgian, and a French woman who never spoke to us anyway. So English all day was just English. No improvement on the German whatsoever.
And would you say then, obviously it was an introduction to aid to the Church in Need. Would you say that was something that you took to very quickly, the work of the charity, the mission of the charity? Because obviously that was at a time, when communism was at its height, and Europe was really divided by an Iron Curtain.
Well, this was September 1980. And I think it was sort of the beginning of the end. It was the start of the crumbling of the communism. And I just remember, well, first of all, not being aware myself really that there were, let's say, modern day martyrs, that there were people going to the gulags who were being martyred for their faith, living on the underground, having to make that choice. Do I own up to my religion or not? And slowly but surely, the first witnesses of this persecution were starting to come to the headquarters to visit us, to tell us what was happening. And that was a real eye-opener for me. It was very, very moving to hear these people talk about the ultimate sacrifice that they were making, not just for not for themselves so much as, but to keep the faith alive for the Catholics that they knew, the people in their flocks, and but also not just, interesting enough, not just in Eastern Europe. I remember I had a very quick spurt in my career. I was put after a couple of years in charge of Africa. We didn't have so many projects there at the time, but in the 1980s, you had all these countries in Africa that were influenced by Marxism. And so you had West Africa, you had Guinea, Conakry, Benin, and Ghana, and that was one of the first visits to projects I ever went on. So communism went far beyond Eastern Europe. And probably most of those countries are very happy to embrace it. Angola, Mozambique are also very much like that. So
how important do you think the election of John Paul II was, Pope coming from behind the Iron Curtain at a time, as you say, when communism was internationalizing and, communism was being embraced by a lot of people, even in polite society, but somebody to come from behind the Iron Curtain and be on the world stage and tell the truth about life under totalitarianism.
No, definitely. It was really, I think, very clearly God's plan. Was very, very providential, because he himself was such a charismatic person. He had such a charisma. If you remember when he came to Ireland, young people of Ireland, I love you, And so here was this personality, this person who knew what communism was all around, and he was there speaking to us, to the world. Before that, even some people doubted what we were saying as an organization, was sort of like poo-pooing our attitude towards communism being dangerous. And then suddenly we had a pope from there who knew very, very well what he was talking about. And I'm sure that played a big role in the beginning of the end of communism too. He was a very far-sighted person, a visionary, who helped the rest of the world understand that this is an evil thing and that it has to come to an end. There's something much, much better than this communism.
And because of your extensive experience, and you're talking about when you first joined in the 70s and 80s, the priority area was around communism and trying to tackle those systems. I suppose now, 40 years later, the global order has entirely changed.
Yes.
And you feel free to break this question down, so I know it might be broad. Since you've taken over now as executive president in 2023, what do you think are the most pressing needs of Christians around the world? Where is the threat coming from the most?
Yeah, where is it coming from the most? Well, I think I see maybe two aspects. So one of them certainly would be the authoritarian governments, like in India. What we've got in China is probably no longer communism, but certainly a very strong authoritarian government with total control. So we are seeing this growing in many parts of the world. And then I think a radical form of Islam. This way back in those days, early 90s, it wasn't, I think, on anybody's radar. There wasn't even a real understanding of it. I was listening to a podcast recently about the fall of the Shah in Iran and how the American government under Jimmy Carter, they really fully underestimated Khomeini, who was in the Ayatollah, who was preparing to take over. And, the Americans were sort of thinking, oh, well, he's against the communists, so that's fine, yeah. And so we really did underestimate the powerful force of an Islam that is radical. Now, not all Muslims are like that. There are peace-loving Muslims, but those who are jihadists who sign up to this radical form, they can do an awful lot of damage. And they have already done so much damage. If you look at the Middle East, if you look at Iraq or Syria, and now spreading into West Africa.
Well, I wanted to ask you that about Africa because, of course, we think of the Middle East as, the cradle of Islamic State, the cradle of this jihadism, but now, it's spreading across Africa as well.
Yeah, but I think it's a fallout. Well, first of all, it's a fallout of what happened in the Middle East. It's a fallout of Libya, the fall of Libya. You've got all these jihadists who, had nowhere to go looking for a new target. But I think a lot of it does come from the partially failed Islamic State in the Middle East, but which is rearing its head again. Every now and then it pops up. And so many of these, there are so many different radical groups in West Africa, but they do work together to a large extent. But what's interesting is I remember 20 or 30 years ago, the bishops from Sudan, which at that time was one country, they were convinced that there was a plan by Saudi Arabia to spread Islam and their form of Islam throughout Africa. And I think nobody really listened to them at the time. But looking at it now, I think they weren't far wrong, actually. No, unfortunately.
You have seen the horrors of so many ideologies that foster this really hardcore anti-Christian sentiment. And it's been inherent now in the West for, a long time. It's moved from the East. Now it's kind of moved to the West, as, Pope Francis very eloquently described it as polite persecution as the West. I think this would be fascinating just to get your insights on this. Relative to 40 years ago, are the threats now more compelling for Christians? Are the dangers more serious than they were 40 years ago?
I think, you're speaking about the West.
Just generally speaking.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think, we bring out our report every 2 years, Religious Freedom Report. We bring out another report about the persecution of Christians. And unfortunately, we see the trend is increasing. It is increasing. And but on the other hand, I think we have to have hope because there are so many brave Christians out there who are not afraid to stand up for their faith, to say, well, I'm a Christian and I'm proud of being a Christian, or I'm a Catholic and proud of being a Catholic. So I remember saying once to a bishop from, I think it was Syria, lamenting with him about the situation of the Christians in his country. And he says to me, but sure, we've been here 2,000 years,
Mm.
Okay, it is worse, maybe worse than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think he's right as well. We don't give up. We
Yeah.
don't give up. And we have to believe in that God is there to help us to persevere in our faith. And he sends us good pastors and good sisters and bishops. Yeah.
And what gives you hope in the midst of that? Because, Papal Foundation, like Aid to the Church, need, carrying out, the service of the Holy Father to the most vulnerable parts of the church. And, we're working harder and harder. And in many parts of the world, the situation is getting worse. I mean, how do you find hope in the midst of that?
I think it's the people I meet. I meet so many wonderful people that really, despite their situation, do not despair and do not give up. And sometimes it's the bishops. And sometimes it's the very simple Catholics, I'd say. I think a country that stands out in my mind so much is Pakistan. And the situation of Christians is terrible in Pakistan. And I know you've been there
Yeah.
as well, Michael, and I've met very simple people. One story that stays in my mind, which forgive me if you've heard it before, but I remember on a trip to Pakistan with a colleague in Lahore, we were presented to this Catholic man, Yusuf, who 3 months before had been playing cards with his Muslim neighbours, as he usually did. A fight broke out.
Mm-hmm.
And they accused him of burning a page of the Quran, which is blasphemy,
Mm-hmm.
which could result in death.
Yeah.
And his first reaction was to run away. And then he gave himself up to police because he had a wife and children. And he was tortured for 3 months and told, well, if you convert, we'll let you go. But the Bishops' Conference Department for Commission for Peace and Justice fought on his behalf and managed to get him out. And the day we met him, it was a day after he'd been released. And through the interpreter, we naively perhaps said to him, but why didn't you give in? What helped you to keep going? And on the wall behind myself and my colleague was a crucifix. And this man, Yusuf, looked at the crucifix and said, but sure, he suffered so much more than I did. And that was so humbling. I remember my colleague and I, we had tears in our eyes because it was he was just so convincing and so convinced. And on that trip to Pakistan, we met a few people who had suffered one way or the other. There was a man who had got, a Catholic man who got a little bit of promotion in international factory, business. And he was treated so badly by his Muslim colleagues. And again, we asked him the question and it was the same answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, these people, they don't have the chance of studying their faith like we do, or maybe the possibilities or the education, whatever, but such a firm belief in Christ's suffering, that he suffered for us, and what we're asked to do will never come up to what he had to do. So and that's, I think, in every country where you look, where you see the situation of the Christians. I've been to countries like China, first time at the end of the 90s, spent a week visiting the underground church with a foreign missionary who was there incognito, and just been very impressed by bishops and the priests who had been arrested numerous times and sent away for re-education, as they called it. But again, by the ordinary people who during that week were hiding us in their houses so that we could go and meet the priests and the bishops and so on. And again, very simple people. These were people in the countryside. So yeah, I think that's what gives us hope, these people.
Mhm.
No.
I used, Michael and I, we met a politician there in Ireland, a fairly prominent politician. And because Michael, when he went to Pakistan, he came home and
Yeah.
he told me all his experiences and just some of the terrible and grave injustices Christians face. As you said there, trumped up blasphemy charges,
Mm.
forced marriages, the brick killings, which is a basically a form of slavery, a modern day form of slavery. And I used these examples, and you could see it really resonated with him. But unfortunately, as Michael has often alluded to in the past, there is a blind spot when it comes to these instances all around the world. And moreover, there seems to be a bit of a blind spot when it comes to Christians who experience these sorts of conditions as well. And as I said, having those direct conversations with that politician, I really do feel we made a difference. Do you think, generally speaking, there's enough attention given to the topic of Christian persecution around the world? Let's say maybe in the West, coming from the media and coming from politicians.
No, I don't think there is. And I think that's really our job, SEN, and any people listening to us, any of our benefactors. I think we have to really talk to people about this and to make the point. Now, we do have, like you here, and also in other countries where ACN has offices and where we fundraise, we do have people who speak with local politicians. We have a group who speak, who go to the European Union, they go to the United Nations, not so much speaking themselves, but getting witnesses from the countries to come and tell their story. Not just us, but they themselves tell their stories. Now, sometimes we see it's very small, very slight, but for example, the European Union, we do speak there because the European Union gives a lot of money to these countries in the developing world. And what we have found sometimes is the politicians we speak to in Brussels, we see a little bit of the penny dropping, and in some cases, a willingness to before they renew contracts, agreements with these countries, to look into it, the situation, and to see, well, how are the Christians being treated? And our hope is to make it a condition that there will be better laws. And we've seen it in Pakistan recently, in the north in Islamabad. They have changed the age of when a young girl becomes an adult, and there's forced marriages at the age of 13, and I believe they've upped it now to 18 years, and I do believe that's because of pressure from outside, from groups like us, really making a point to the money givers. And I think that's very often that's what decides things.
Follow the money.
If you've got these governments or union, the EU as giving money, then they can play that card.
I want to ask you a really sensitive question, Regina, and I don't know that there's an easy answer to this even. I mean, obviously the most important thing for us in Aid to the Church in Need is the people that we're blessed to serve. We don't exist for ourselves, or we don't exist for our own publicity. How do we balance the need to kind of call out persecution with actually the fact that sometimes in doing that we could make it worse? And sometimes our partners in really, really difficult parts of the world are saying to us, please don't say anything. When actually the easiest thing in the world for us would be to make a big song and dance on social media, and perhaps some other, less responsible actors do make a big song and dance on social media.
No, it's very difficult. We have a lot of discussions about this internally. And in the end, I think we have to respect our partners. We have building up trust with them is so important to the work that we do. And I think breaking that trust is not something that we can afford to do. I mean, one country that at the moment, this is very much people are not aware of, maybe it's Nicaragua. It's a terrible situation. Where Mother Teresa's sisters were expelled. I mean, come on, Mother Teresa's sisters don't. The Apostolic Nuncio was expelled, some bishops and some priests. And we would love to say more about that, but we're very conscious that what we say could fall back on those who are still in the country. And I do think there's ways you can still draw attention to the situation of a country without speaking about specific persons or places, but it's a tough one. It really, really is tough. And I think We hear it from the bishops in Cuba a lot too. I think there's a big difference between being there, living it on a day-to-day level and experience, and being outside. And I know there's always been this tension. I remember going back as far as Czechoslovakia in the day when it was one country. The people living in Czechoslovakia and the people in exile, there was always a lot of criticism from the exiles towards those who were still there about not being strong enough, not standing up enough. You have it with Cuba. I think a lot of the Cubans in Miami will criticize the Cubans in there and maybe the Cuban church. But it's...
There's a lot of freedom in Miami that is not a given everywhere.
Yeah, so I think we have to just be careful in judging the ones who are still there and in what actions they take. And maybe they're doing things in a small way that is still making a difference, but it's not just so obvious to us, I think.
And I suppose 2026 has begun on quite a tumultuous note, to say the least, in terms of conflict. The conflict in Iran now has seemingly spilled into parts of the Lebanon, which resulted, of course, in the death of a Catholic priest yesterday. Now, of course, more conflict means that ACN's work is more vital than ever before.
Yeah.
So that is the contradiction there. We're busier than ever before and our work is more valuable. But what gives you hope amid all of the turmoil in the world? What provides you with that comfort and that solace?
I suppose it's our faith. Our faith is a faith of hope. I don't know if there are many faiths like that, religions like that. Some people would probably say, it's crazy. Was it St. Paul said, we're considered to be, some people laugh at us Christians for putting our faith in the crucified Lord, in the cross.
It's a folly.
But we know there was the resurrection. We believe there was the resurrection. And I think, yes, we go through difficult times and hard times, and it's hard to see where is the end of the war, of the suffering in Ukraine, for example. Where is that? But I think if we are Christians, we really have to look beyond Good Friday and believe in the resurrection.
Yeah.
And I know it's easier said than done, but I do believe it.
I was in Bethlehem a few weeks ago, and it's so unusual at the moment and heartbreaking, really, because there are no pilgrims in Bethlehem. And of course, Bethlehem used to welcome about 2 million pilgrims every year. So it was always teeming, but it's completely empty now. But one of the positive side effects of that was that I was able to go down to the grotto of the Nativity, where the Lord was born, and spend so much time there alone by myself, not with the usual hustle and bustle. And, you just think that really Christianity is a religion that just really contrasts the world in which we live, because here we have, the Lord of history born in such humility in in a regional outpost of the Roman Empire, whereas we live in a world now which is, always priding, the person who can shout the loudest or the person who could be the most ostentatious, So I think it really is the paradox of Christianity, that, it says in the scriptures, my power is at its best in weakness.
Yeah. But, the other thing that really gives me hope are our benefactors.
Yeah.
We have such genuine and generous benefactors, and many of them who don't have a lot of money themselves, and they are giving donations, help, support, people who are far away that they'll never meet.
Yeah.
And their prayers as well. It's not just about money, it's also they're praying for these people. And when we go out there and meet the people on the ground that are being supported by ACN, they're so touched to know that another Christian in another part of the world is thinking of them and they haven't been forgotten. This is their big fear, that they will be forgotten.
Yeah.
And, we have offices in South America for collecting funds as well. Now, countries like Brazil, where we always used to give a lot in the past, we still help some projects. But our benefactors in Brazil are a lot of the people who live in the slums, who really... It's a daily battle for them to survive. There's one woman who washes clothes for a living, and what she earns on Saturday, she gives to SEN. Now you can imagine what that is.
Yeah.
And for her, it's a day's wages,
Yeah.
And she's never going to meet the Christians in Syria or Iraq or Pakistan, but she does that. So I think, and again, coming back here to Ireland, such devout, committed people, Catholics, who want to help somebody far away, who understands that they can't do this alone, and that we all really do belong to the same family, the same faith. And so that's really what gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah. I think, Brandon, you were saying you're always struck by that. You visit a lot of parishes, a lot of schools, and just that sense of wanting to help that people have.
I just think as well, it's kind of appropriate that we have an active campaign. It's called the Lenten Missionary Campaign, and featured are 2 Irish missionaries. One is based in Pakistan, Father Tomas King, and the other is Sister Horda Tracy, who's based in South Sudan.
Yes.
And I think it's very appropriate to talk about these people, because we're talking about, the generosity of Irish people. Still to this day, there are Irish missionaries going abroad, helping the neediest, helping people who are desolate, who have absolutely nothing, but they're providing a beacon of hope, and they shouldn't ever be forgotten. But hence the campaign, the Lenten Missionary Campaign. So I do recommend, just if you have the time, to check out that campaign on acnireland.org. You'll find it fascinating, and as I said, there's an Irish dimension to it as well. So thanks very much for joining us for this edition of the Faith Under Fire podcast, and for giving a voice to the voiceless Christians in an effort to create a world where Christianity can truly thrive. Thank you very much to our Executive President of ACN International, Regina Lynch, for coming in to visit our beautiful castle today. I hope you're enjoying the surroundings.
I am indeed. No, I'm delighted to have this chat with you 2 gentlemen, one from the south, one from the north. Very good. No, but thank you. And
no, thank you so much for making the time. We really appreciate it, and I know that benefactors love to hear from you and love to hear what's going on in the international charity, because I think one of the great blessings of working for Aid to the Church in Need is people feel such a sense of being part of the charity. It's like we're part of a movement, and the prayer is so important, and people really, we started a section recently in the Little Mirror magazine that we have for people to send in prayer intentions. We get so many prayer intentions now, so it's just beautiful, that sense that Aid to the Church in Need is also a praying community. So dear friends and benefactors, we thank you very much for joining us for this latest episode of Faith Under Fire. You can find out much more about the work of Aid to the Church in Need on our website, acnireland.org. But in the meantime, from me, Michael Kelly,
Me, Brandon Scott,
we'll join you next time. Thank you, and God bless.